Welcome, everyone. I'm Neil Pretty, CEO of Aristotle Performance. We're a consulting and training and development firm that works with organizations globally to improve psychological safety and to create high-performance learning organizations. So that's sort of our goal, is understanding that psychological safety isn't the ends, it's the means. It's one of the means to the ends of performance and learning. But along that way, psychological safety can be weaponized, and that usually comes from misunderstanding and poor training. We see poor training all over the place and poor content all over the place, and that's usually sort of where that starts. So on the agenda today, we're gonna do some breakouts, some triads, a variety of different sort of exercises around things, and we'll talk about some of the ways that we try to approach this challenge, and some frameworks to sort of organize thinking around, combating the weaponization of psychological safety. And to get us started, we're gonna have a bit of a let's do it. We'll do a pause. So what I want everyone to do is just sit in your chair. You can go off camera if that's preferred. Soften the gaze, find your feet on the ground, and bring your attention to here and to now. And I want you first to just feel the ground under your feet, acknowledging that you're rooted here, and being planted on this earth is a good thing. And I want you to slowly bring your attention from the bottom of your feet through your legs, just slowly bringing your attention upward. Noticing any anxious energy or tension. And as you rise to your seat, acknowledging the sensation of feeling supported, knowing that you are supported. Bringing your attention up through your spine, and as your attention drifts away, just gently bringing it back, knowing that there's no wrong place to be, only the place that you choose to be. Bringing your awareness up into your chest, noticing what your breath is like. Is it slow? Is it fast? Just noticing where it's landing in your body. Just take a moment for a couple of deep breaths, and as the air comes into your lungs, allowing the nourishment that it brings to go throughout your body. Now bring your attention to your hands. Noticing if there's any tension there, and feeling free to let it go. And as we take a few more breaths, bringing our awareness further into how we are doing today, how we're feeling today. what we might need from this group today. Thinking about what we might offer this group today. I'll invite you to bring your attention back to the session as you feel called to rejoin and come off of the camera or come on camera. As people rejoin, we will start the session.
Thank you.
How's that, Fernando?
Was good.
Put me on the spot there.
Definitely a good centering exercise. Yeah, people, we are on the 40th virtual facilitation practice. And actually, Neil was one of the first ones back in 2020, the beginning of the craziness of the pandemic. You led a session with us in psychological safety. It was fun. I remember we planned on the deck. Neil and I, we live in the same city. And actually Steve as well. Where's Steve? Nelson United. Yeah, I remember back in the day, we were planning the session and we have been doing this for a while. So it's been fun and it's always a place to learn and to share and connect with different people in different places.
Mm-hmm.
So use the chat as much as you want for questions, for comments, for talking with your friends. We'll meet for these 90 minutes. Remember to take your distractions away from your computer. And today we have Neil. I'll just put a little blurb. Not little, but you probably read this. Neil is one of the most talented guys to talk about this topic that I know. And he's been requested to go everywhere to talk and to lead teams, to consult, to coach people. So very knowledgeable guy. A privilege to have you here. And before he starts the session, let's get warmed up. Some people I know, they just come to the sessions to meet people, to reconnect and to find new facilitators, new consultants, new educators. So we'll be together in triads. Let me see. I think we have one pair. So 2 people will have more time. And you have 6 minutes to discuss this question. Why is it important for you to be here today? And what do you hope to take away? And how can you contribute? So 6 minutes, quick conversation to warm up. And then when you're back, Neil will start his work with you. See you in a bit.
4, maybe. There's some people that just blow my mind.
Amy Edmondson is.
Yeah, I mean, there's really 2 people that I think of that know that I'm like always look to for answers. Yeah.
Murray, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, good.
Nice.
We have lots to talk.
Yeah. I had a conflict for these for almost a year there, so it's nice to be in a different scenario where I can try to be more accessible for them because they're great. So looking forward to today.
Thank you for coming. Neil, polling.
Thank you.
Polling.
Okay.
Poll. Okay. We're going to start off with a bit of a poll just to, get a sense of the room here. What is your level of familiarity with psychological safety?
5, it's expert, and 0 is what? I just click on the link and just came here.
I was just curious if that mustache was real. Does he really walk around like that every day? Sadly,
Okay.
yes.
So we have the results.
Awesome.
Can you see on your side, Neil?
Yep, I can see that. That's great. I'm curious. I really want to talk to who said expert. That's great. Wonderful. So I'd love to hear from a couple of voices, like how do you describe psychological safety? How is it that you communicate psychological safety to other people or understand it for yourself?
And start.
Go for it.
I was just telling that I was in the International Summit of Psychological Safety that we have here in São Paulo. I saw your video.
So you're familiar with my face anyways, yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
your thoughts a little bit. But what came to me from this meeting was how much we are focusing in the leaderships and the responsibility for the leadership of the in the companies to bring up the psychological safety and to ensure that everything works that way. And I was missing the workers, the people. Where are they? How we are not looking at them, but they are a big role in maintaining and asking for it too. It's not just a top down. So that was my takeout from there.
Yeah, I really appreciate you bringing that up because, as we go through today, the question of psychological safety or the question that's often connected to psychological safety is who's responsible? And the answer is everybody. So that's a great answer. Yeah, I love that. Thank you. Jana, I think you had your hand up for a moment there. And feel free to just come off mute and join the conversation.
I think of psychological safety as, is it safe to say out loud, ask a question, share an idea that might be, a little risky or off the mark, and how much of that can be voiced, and then have people still feel respected and that they're not going to pay a penalty for what
Yeah. So it's sort of like social leniency. How much grace are you given? How much grace do you feel like you have to say what you want to say and have it be heard? Yeah. And a couple in the chat here, to feel you can be you. I love that because that's certainly a connected part of it. It's about being able to express opinions and ideas without fear of embarrassment, mistakes. People feel comfortable about being vulnerable, supporting each other, suggesting ideas, flagging issues, admitting mistakes, and debating constructively. Yeah, so I love that in part because there's sort of this respect aspect to it. Psychological safety isn't just I get to say whatever the heck I want, whenever I want, to whoever I want, under whatever contexts, right? There's a respect side of psychological safety too. So one of the sort of technical definition is that psychological safety is the shared belief that you will not be punished or humiliated for sharing ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes. So the core thing that people miss about this is that it is a belief. It's something we believe. It's not necessarily fact. The belief is like faith. We don't really necessarily always have the evidence. So it's hard to put your finger on what exactly this thing means. And in the literature, psychological safety is an environmental condition. So when we work with groups, we are considering how we should show up, how we should behave, so that we can work best with that group. This is like a genetic thing. This is something we start doing when we move from individual play to group play when we're very, very young children. So one of the biggest challenges that we have when we're talking about psychological safety is that it is so ingrained in who we are as human beings that we don't even consider it as like something that is a problem, in part because it helps solve a lot of problems for us, right? If we assess our environment and all the complexity that goes with that, silence is a very helpful default. So to create safety, it isn't a lack of threat. It is the presence of connection. Frida, you wrote in here, or some of us can assume psychological safety. And I think this is one of those aspects that's very important. In one of our training sessions, the certification that we do for facilitators, we go through group agreements and work through that quite extensively to try to build our container for our certification and training sessions. And assume positive intent always comes up. It is like the most consistent thing that comes up. And since one conversation, we've changed that to acknowledge that intent and impact are different. Because we can't necessarily assume positive intent, but we can acknowledge that intention and impact are different. So this is a really important element, because if we assume we have psychological safety, if we assume that we can bring up, ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes, and we can't, we've misjudged our environment. So we usually err on the side of caution. So the goal here is to sort of move away from the understanding of psychological safety that we want to remove threat. And in the Canadian market in particular, Australia has this as well. There's a mandate that organizations create a psychologically safe environment. Now, as someone who, Fernando would call me an expert in this field, but I've worked in this field specifically for a long time. It's a bad mandate, because what it does is suggest that if you remove bullying or remove toxic behavior, you've created psychological safety, and that is not the case. Our goal as leaders, facilitators, as members of teams is to dial down the temperature on the elements that reduce psychological safety and dial up the temperature on things and increase the habits intentionally that create psychological safety. So safety is not the absence of threat, it is the presence of connection. And one of the reasons why this is important is because of the actual, why psychological safety matters now is because we have complex environments and complex problems where multiple people have different aspects of a problem or a different puzzle piece that we're trying to put together. And to gather those diverse perspectives, we need psychological safety, or we simply won't hear them. So we can't solve complex problems without diverse perspective, and we can't have diverse perspective without psychological safety. So problem solving is a big part of that. Decision making, if you want to make a good decision, all these kinds of things. And what it really comes down to is your ability to bring in new information and apply it. And that's a long-winded version of saying learning. And the history of psychological safety, a lot of people think started with Dr. Amy Edmondson of Harvard University, and it did not. She came across the term psychological safety, which had been coined something like 30 years previous, or 25 years previous to her work. And what it was learning readiness, research into learning readiness. Can we identify behaviors that show us that people are ready, willing, and able to learn, take in new information and apply it? And the reason why this is relevant is because you can actually witness impression management. And that was the term that was coined to describe those behaviors. So we control the flow of information about ourselves to try to control our environment. Even dressing in a nicer set of clothing is a form of impression management. Ingratiation, virtue signaling. I love going into organizations where they say they have integrity as one of their virtues. And one of my favorite stories is the very first big Fortune 500 company to do a values exploration was ExxonMobil. And they came up at the end and they said, customer first. Customer first was their top value. And all the regional CEOs are sitting around, and the youngest, and I always say youngest and least indoctrinated, stood up and he said, well, it's not really customer first. It's you. And he pointed to the seventh most powerful CEO. You. And he said, it's customer last. After all you, then it's the customer. And they all laughed because they knew he was right. So virtue signaling, is a very good way of signaling to people that you're worth working with. But it's not necessarily true when it comes to behavior. So This is the kind of impression management that we see. And in a lot of cultures, for example, we work with one organization where if they ask for a 5-page report, the person will show up with a 20-page report. In one case, they showed up with a 200-page report. That is a kind of virtue signaling to try to stay safe in an unsafe environment. So we see this kind of behavior. It's a way to see the consequences of low psychological safety, which is a term that was coined at the same time. The more we see impression management behaviors, the lower the psychological safety. The less we see impression management, the higher psychological safety. So they have this inverse correlation. So this matters because psychological safety isn't the end goal. Psychological safety builds a foundation, and then holding people accountable to a higher standard generates learning, generates outcomes, the right kind of outcomes. And then as we refine that, we generate high performance. So it's a sort of positive cycle that psychological safety allows for. Another way to think about it is how much time are we spending? And I love this one for CFOs, for example. How much time and energy are people expelling on thinking about the right thing to say and how to say it versus just saying it? And the answer is a lot. So I'm going to share my screen for just a couple of slides to just punctuate this point a little bit and talk about something that we call crouching tigers. So when it comes to psychological safety, no one comes up with a good idea while being chased by a tiger. So at a neurological level, we know that it's safer to be part of the group. And if there is a tiger, we're going to prioritize running away from the tiger. And if we don't get eaten, we're successful. So if somebody says something in a meeting and we go, oh, I probably shouldn't say anything, primary goal is to survive that moment. And saying nothing is the best way to do that. We don't suffer any kind of social rejection. We don't suffer any kind of concern for our career. There's all these like benefits. So it takes a lot of effort to flip that narrative. So we coined this term called crouching tigers. And we love our little guy there. We've never really named him, but you know, crouching tigers are the overt or covert behaviors, contexts, or situations that we have trouble judging. Psychological safety is not an opt-in or opt-out thing. It's a thing you're aware of and participating in improving, or it's a thing that you're aware of and you're using to your advantage and the disadvantage of others, or it's something you're not aware of at all. It is happening. You're all doing it right now. I'm doing it right now. We're assessing our environment to see how are we being received, right? We're looking for facial expressions. The challenge is that we have trouble judging. This is why Zoom meetings are so exhausting, because we're looking for this information all the time, right? So I'm just going to check the chat here. Looks like claps. Oh, the little tiger's cute. Yeah, he's cute, isn't he? I like him. So some examples are here. I'll give you a second to read these. And then before I continue, I'll ask, what are some of your favorites that stand out? Maybe they're ones that you've said. I know I've said a bunch of these. I have a personal favorite that I'll share after. But I'm curious, looking at this list of examples, if any stand out to you as maybe surprising or familiar. If you want me to put the list back, put it back up, I can too. I know I took it down kind of quick. And again, feel free to come off mute or pop it in the chat.
Can you put the list back up, please?
Yeah, sure.
My door is always open was surprising, and I get it, seeing it written out. Yes, it's similar to some of these other ones here.
Right. So what stands out about that to you? Like you say, you get it. So Just can you describe that to me a little bit more?
It's empty without practice behind it.
Oh, can I just take that quote and write it down? It's empty without practice behind it. I love that. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Another thing about that, the best example I've found of this is like northern communities, for example. Well, you used to, before Zoom meetings and telemedicine, for example, would have like a counselor or a psychologist or a doctor come into town once a week to the same office. You know, and if you're going to that one office, everybody knows that you're going there because you have some problem. Now you become the center of the rumor mill. So the office version of that is, do you have to go up an elevator? Does the person that you're going to go talk to have a bunch more power than you do? Do you have to walk across the hall and go through a whole bunch of cubicles? You know, there's these boundaries and barriers for, you know, that can be physical or mental or, you know, like organizationally designed, you know, like a hierarchy that can make that a lot harder. But I'd love to hear a couple other ones.
Sorry, I'm trying to have lunch here and we're 3 hours off here. So apologies for being off camera. The two that are interesting there for me that just seeing them in this context, you know, when you're trying to you've set up consensus, you set up the decision-making process, ideally collectively, but generally speaking, trying to aim towards some sort of, you know, consensus process that balances, meaningful conversation and so on, but and good dialogue with some action and movement. And those two bullets in there around, so we're all in agreement and speak up if anyone disagrees. You know, I mean, I can see very easily how those could be used if some other sort of contextual pieces aren't in place. Those set up some huge barriers for psychological safety, and arguably, even if you've done some good work, I could see how those, you know, and again, seeing it on a slide like this in this kind of a context, I can see how even in that context, where you've done some good work to kind of set it up, they still create some barriers. And so maybe naming it, or I'm not sure how to, it'd be interesting to think about a little bit more about how to offset that.
Yeah, well, I think you're highlighting something really that's really wonderful about this list, frankly, which is that example that you mentioned. So we're all in agreement then. Where that sits in a conversation and the tone of voice completely change the meaning and the kind of response that you get. I mean, there's nothing wrong with saying so we're all in agreement when everybody's shared their opinion and you're feeling aligned. The question is that coming in a point of conversation and at a tone of voice where it's confirming alignment, or is it generating consensus? You know, so the question becomes, to what degree do we care about our audience? Do we actually want those perspectives, or are we just trying to get agreement? You know, another one that speak up if you disagree, or if a leader just says, I think this, what do you think? It's like, well, obviously now you know, right? You know the right answer, you've been given it. So a couple of these, yeah, you mentioned, where's the comment here? Some of them are always, most of these are oblivious of the power dynamic between the speaker and the audience. Absolutely. Power is a big component of this, and understanding that power. So I was in a GEC, a Global Executive Committee, working with them in Hong Kong recently. I was supposed to be there, but I ended up doing it from here, which was actually quite interesting. And one of the things that came up was like, so what do we do about it? I said, the first thing you need to do is acknowledge that you have an unbelievable amount of power over the people you're asking for their opinion from. You know, like just acknowledging that and recognizing that has a huge impact over how they're going to speak up is really important. So I love Some of the comments that are here. So the question is, if you want to engage in open dialogue, how do you reframe the statement or tone? Absolutely. So for me, one of the things I've done is just called it out. Like, oh, sorry, I told you what I think before I asked everybody what they wanted to say, you know, just acknowledging that you kind of made a misstep. It's a very simple process. But we do these things, and this is a sort of shortened version of impression management. But we do these things so we don't look ignorant, incompetent, intrusive, or negative. Like, we don't want to look like these things ever. I also like to say, if we don't look like we add value or have meaning to the group, then we feel a lack as well. We're going to talk about appreciation and acknowledgement later, because that's a way to build psychological safety. But we're going to head off into a breakout. And it says 5 minutes, because we're going to do a bit of a triz. And the question is, how can you guarantee that our work environment becomes toxic? If we're a team, what are all the ways that you can ensure that the environment becomes toxic? Because, and I say becomes toxic, not is toxic, because toxicity is like a thing that builds to a level where it's poisonous. It's not a thing that like happens one day and it's off the next day. It's like it becomes so toxic we can no longer endure it. So what would build that?
Six minutes, right?
Yep, 6 is good. Yeah, I had 5 on the slide, but 6 is better.
Okay, so let me get the groups reorganized. And I'll put in the chat for you the question. Let just uncheck you, Neil. I think you are on the breakout as well. So I'll take you from here and put you over there. Okay, so write in the chat these crazy ideas, because when we are back in the main room, we want to hear some of these interesting ideas. See you in a bit.
Magic number is 30%, right? Got a 30% representation for people to feel like they can contribute. Welcome back.
And everybody's back.
All righty. Welcome back. So please pop your answers into the chat so that we can kind of look at them. And I'd love to hear a few voices around things that maybe stood out. I love it when some of them are really real life. We do this with facilitator. With the one question that I often ask facilitators, and we do a triz around this, is what are all the worst things that can happen in a session when you're debriefing psychological safety? And someone actually said someone in a family dies, and I had that happen. I started a session and the person opened her phone to shut it on to focus, and she'd found out that her father had passed away. So sometimes the triz comes to life. It was very interesting. Try to manage that. Can you believe it, Jana? Or Jana? Leader shouts, yeah. Yeah, shouting, seeking one person, one wreckable neck or scapegoat. I've never heard the term wreckable neck, but I love that. Yeah, I've been a wreckable neck a few times. I'm a bit disagreeable, so I usually speak up. To blame when something goes wrong, expecting level of perfection. Perfectionism, yeah, perfectionism is like a sure sign of low psychological safety, because perfectionism is a coping strategy for stress. Right? If I'm perfect, I become unassailable. So love it. Don't care about other opinions, self-importance, blaming everyone as much as possible, mocking, intimidating. Oh yeah, love all these. Blow up small mistakes. Oh, love that. Yeah, publicize tiny little mistakes. Yeah, so this is great. These are particularly good because in a learning organization, you highlight small mistakes to learn. In a poor team culture that is going to generate and become toxic, you highlight little mistakes to embarrass people or to mock them, or, you know, so it's like the crouching tiger, but in reverse. You have this like small thing that can become a big influence for positivity or a big influence on negativity. Grumpy, bad mood. Yeah. Holding people responsible for other people's decisions. I love that one. Yeah. Emotional dysregulation. Yeah. All over these lists. Yeah. Yeah. So Frida, can you speak a little bit more about that? Do you mind?
Yeah, I mean, I experience this often in my context. And yeah, just sort of like seeing it here as well, sort of like shouting, making, you know, blowing things up, having like an outsized response in a context really subverts safety. Like, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So I love this, and I love these because emotional dysregulation becomes this, like, I'm going to use the word lighthouse. You know, it becomes the thing that the person is known for. You know, becomes a reputation, is that they can't manage themselves well. And the key thing to understand about psychological safety is our core goal as human beings is to organize our behavior in anticipation of future events. So if we want people to organize their behavior towards continuous learning, we need to behave in a certain way and help clarify certain things. But if we want to organize our behavior to prepare ourselves for future events and we don't know how people are going to behave, or this whole list of things is going to happen, keeping your head down, impression management, silence, like that's a good option. It works. And that's the problem, is that it works temporarily. So the question is, are we organizing our behavior in anticipation of future events that are in the moment and we are myopic? Or are we able to stretch that view and think bigger picture, you know, and consider, well, I should say something because that's going to help us further down the road. It might be a little bit risky or a little bit uncomfortable right now, but is it going to be better for us down the road? And this is why we say psychological safety is not about being comfortable. You know, and I say this when we do leadership training all the time. We like intentionally create uncomfortable environments and then kind of share, like, this, the reason why we're sharing this is to condition you to the idea that creating psychological safety isn't necessarily comfortable for leaders either. All the actions are going to ask you to stretch your capacity, stretch your comfort with vulnerability or authenticity, for example. And I think one of the reasons why I'm going to show you the next slide is because a lot of the things that are on this list that you've all come up with that are wonderful and true, completely true, are on the extremities. They're more overt. They're the things that you can see, right? And the challenge with psychological safety is moving out of the overt and into the covert, because the covert are the ones, that's where the real meat and the juicy potatoes and everything, like that's where the real challenges of psychological safety come up. It's in the subtleties. And, you know, manipulation of vulnerability is one that we see quite often. Selective enforcement is another one, or the perception of selective enforcement. So I'll give you an example of this myself. At the end of a meeting, a colleague of ours, or a colleague of mine, threw this really wonderful idea when there was like 3 minutes left in the meeting, and all of us had different meetings to go to. We were kind of compressed. We had a big agenda, and I totally shot down the idea. I was like, ah, shit. You know, I knew that I made a misstep. So I sent her a text immediately, and I was clear in the text. Can we hop on the phone so I can apologize for what I said? I didn't mean for it to come out that way, and I'd like to speak to you directly. Right? So very clear with what I wanted to talk about, not the, you know, the ever present, can we talk? And it's not enough. It's not enough clarity. It's not a way that someone can organize their behavior in anticipation of what's coming. So did that. We had a conversation. She didn't care. She was like, yeah, I knew that was, end the meeting. I know it's not your character, whatever. But then the next thing that was important was I said, how do you want me to share to the rest of the team that this conversation happened, that this repair happened? And we discussed what that would look like, and I did it. Because selective enforcement includes the leader. If you're leading a team and you don't get to be judged by the same standard as the people on the team, that's selective enforcement. So those kinds of these kinds of things cause people to question, because in the lack of clarity, people will insert story. So creating a false sense of security. This is another way that, we see a lot of this gaslighting and then overemphasis on psychological safety. We love to call this Midwestern nice in the States. I'm Canadian, so I get to say Canadian nice. Trying to protect other people. Trying to be nice instead of kind. Nice makes me feel comfortable. Kindness makes me feel uncomfortable, but is in service to you. So it's a very important distinction, that speaking in a way that might help hold people to a higher standard is also something that creates that clarity where people can be more certain, more secure in how they're supposed to behave to work well together. So we're going to go back into some breakouts, and the question will be, what can you do about it? But I also want to hear a couple of voices if there's any questions, or I'm curious if anything's sort of standing out from what I'm saying that might be new or different thinking from what you've had before. Okay. Fernando, whenever we want, 10 minutes in groups of 3 to 5. Whatever that looks like in the Zoomiverse. What can you do about it? How can we show up as leaders or as members of teams, or facilitators, or in whatever? Yushi, wonderful having you. Thank you. What can you do about it?
In different groups.
Wonderful.
Different groups.
Yeah.
And how much time? 5 minutes?
Let's do 6 minutes again.
6 minutes.
Oh, Jana, you got to drop off too? Okay.
Okay, so let me check here. Okay, 1, 2, 3. So we have groups of 4, more or less. Yeah, 2 quartets and 1 triad.
Great.
Here we go, 6 minutes. Questions are in the chat.
Sorry. Steve and Alana, forgive me. I just had a
It was feeling
overactive
very
trigger finger.
psychologically safe, Laura, but then that just ruined it for me. I don't know.
Hey, sorry. I'm sending a cup of tea your way.
Oh, thank you. That helps.
Love it. Well, welcome back. If you've written them in the chat, please just copy and paste, and so that we can all see what you wrote down. And again, I'd love to hear some perspectives. I'd love to hear some ideas. I mean, I've always found that I learned something during these that I don't expect. So, love to hear what your perspectives are. I love this first statement: capacity building to hold more difference and different ways of expressing. I love that. Yeah, it's like a call to action to seek to understand instead of seek to reply. And I've often said that, like, your capacity to learn is connected to your tolerance for difference and your capacity to be wrong. It's like a real, like, that's a sort of an internal, you're speaking to whoever wrote that. It's a wonderful line of thinking to follow. Acknowledging the toxicity, inviting change, and open dialogue. Well, inviting change, it's really, really interesting. Like, how do we frame change? How do we actually do that in a way that, like, things are going to change anyway, so we might as well, decide that we're going to get on that train instead of get run over by it. Appreciative inquiry. Oh yeah, I love that. Acknowledge what's happening clearly to everyone. Invite some people from the outside to help. Yeah, outside help is really, really good. I'm actually in the process of seeking an organization that would let me research the impact of HRBPs on psychological safety. Because what we're starting to notice is that psychological safety in an organization doesn't sit on a normal distribution bell curve. It sits on a power curve where a few people tend to have an outsized impact on that. And I'm curious if HRBPs might also be that. So love all of these. But I'd love to hear from you all. What was it like generating some of these answers, and what are some that stuck out to you?
We were talking about the role of the person inside this toxic environment, because there is a risk if you are the spoken person to bring it up and nobody's noticing or nobody wants to change it. What are the risks for you inside your role or in the organization? And if you choose to do nothing, regarding the consequences of this also.
Yeah, so acknowledging the consequences of this, I think that's a really interesting phrase just on its own. You know, the question becomes, what are people rewarded for and what are they punished for? For example, an organization that we worked with struggles with innovation and struggles with growth, but they give people 100% of their bonus based on whether they hit the targets that they co-create with their manager. Which initially doesn't sound like a bad thing, but it has this downstream effect. And that's why organizational context, team relationships, and leader behavior are the three biggest influencers of psychological safety. Right? And the leader behavior influences the other two. It can make team relationships better or worse, and they can make the impact of what's going on in the organization better or worse. Laura, you have your hand up. Please go ahead.
Yeah. One of the things is if you are in a group and you are the lone, I use MBTI, but other people use DISC. If you're the lone person who has a particular preference, like if you're the lone introvert in the group, the group can coalesce around you and basically say you're the problem person and not celebrate the difference. And I see this, I see this all the time in either my work with groups or my coaching work. And I think this is an extraordinarily important thing for those leading the groups to understand, because it's not so much, it's a minority in a different way.
I love that you said it's a minority in a different way. You know, like during one of the breaks, Fernando and I were talking about like 30% is the number that needs to be hit for a group for a minority to feel like they're not a minority anymore and that they can speak up. You know, so if you have these more common or less common types, especially in different industries, you know, the question becomes, can the leader reframe that uniqueness as a benefit instead of a challenge?
As a strength.
Yeah,
as
absolutely.
Bringing a new set of insights.
Yeah. So my business partner's like that. He's like, but I refer to him as a sort of penultimate bystander. If you want perspective, put him in a room and wait, and then ask at the end. And he'll share perspective that'll completely change the course of the conversation, sometimes to our irritation because it comes too late. You know, so it is like that push-pull of when you ask for it, because he needs time to digest what's going on and formulate a good answer. But sometimes we wish we had it sooner because it's so good.
And how can you tee up the discussion in advance before you hit the room so that individual has a time to ruminate on it?
Exactly. And it's not uncommon to have that insight come at the beginning of the next session. You know, or if we're doing some kind of collaboration. So like, do we create space for that is ultimately the question. And that really requires, and this is why we see like leader confidence in their leadership capacity is directly correlated with psychological safety. And usually it's not leaders being jerks. It's a lack of leadership competency because they've never been trained and they are poorly supported. That is the most common driver of low psychologically safe environments is actually poor leadership training and low confidence. But I'd love to hear some of the other Moonwai. Sorry, I don't know if I'm saying your name correctly, but
Munway.
Moonwai.
So there's one other thing regarding leaders. Sometimes it's not necessarily poor leadership training. So I'll give you an example that I actually have experienced. There is a very senior person who is obviously very capable. Unfortunately, he's also a bully. And so the way that he interact with people, I mean, I would not have hired him. I would have gotten rid of him. But unfortunately, I'm not his direct supervisor. So when I told basically the head of engineering is actually in engineering, and of course gave examples of his bullying behavior specifically towards me, for example. There was only one interaction, and then that manager basically said, "Oh, well, you're absolutely right. The way that he treated you is unacceptable. So I will talk to him, but he is too valuable.
Yeah.
Get rid of him."
Yeah.
And I'm like, no one is too valuable. That is a bad apple that you're poisoning that team. But they don't agree, right? They said it's too valuable. We need that capability, and I say no, you need to get rid of him. But I don't think that's a leadership training. It's people thinking that capability trumps everything else, or abilities trump everything else.
Yeah, so there's sort of two things there. One, you're absolutely right. It's not all leadership training, for sure. It's just the most common thing that we see. But in that context, the leader who's above that person certainly lacks a degree of character. And what we see is that to create and generate psychological safety, like, requires courage, curiosity, and compassion. Those are the three character traits that we see really drive the kinds of behaviors. So that's the mindset that is there. So in that context, does the person sitting above this individual have the courage to ask for better training, to do the kinds of things, to give them the support? They might not actually know how to behave in another way. And you can be given tons of training and still not know how to not be a bully. So it is not a simple answer, and trying to give simple attribution in that leadership level is really attractive. Like, oh, they're too valuable, so we can't do anything about it. It's like, no. Like you said, they're valuable. Okay, well, they're undermining all their value because they're behaving in this way. So if you want both, you got to remedy one so you can have the other. But it's a harder question to answer, so we choose the easy answer instead, which is I'm not going to do anything about this. Murray, please.
Yeah, I mean, thanks for that example, and I just want to turn it a little bit into another scenario that comes to mind with that, which is, where in community engagement opportunities, in an effort to, ensure that you've got diverse perspectives and ideas, that folks who in fact create unsafety are continually invited, so that whatever that discussion or group is can say, we had representation of blah blah blah, but the persons that for example are creating often unsafe environments don't belong to any one organization. So there's no, then it becomes kind of like, well, how and who, beyond facilitation, where we can bring skills to the best of our ability in that moment, there's no longer sort of accountability structure around supporting that person to shift, to grow, making different decisions in the community as far as, you know, how can we support others to maybe step into these kinds of conversations, you know, like that becomes like another layer of addressing the same kind of scenario that you've just raised, which is one that comes up for me in my work.
Yeah, I mean, I love that. I mean, without question, the most toxic environments we've worked with have been not-for-profits, because there's, you know, no accountability for bad behavior, because there's sort of this like high reward for virtue signaling. And, you know, these kinds of environments are very, very challenging to create group agreements and social agreements. What standard of behavior do we agree to hold ourselves to? At state universities as well. Oh yeah, absolutely. We've tried to work with a couple of universities. Brutal, absolutely brutal. Medical systems, when people get tenure, brutal. Yale Medical is single-handedly the most toxic place that we've ever been involved with. Without question, they're in the news. They didn't even ask us to sign a non-disclosure agreement because they're like, it's all in the news. Right. And we haven't even gotten to work there, and we've been working through the weeds for almost 2 years just to get a green light to do anything. That's how toxic it is. So it is really challenging to face these environments. So I'm going to offer, before we do our sort of last exercise, I'm going to offer a couple of different strategies. One is generating new thinking. So to generate new thinking and dialogue, listening, making connections, and inquiry. So the power of question cannot be understated. And listening deeply is very, very important. So when I talk about listening deeply, and I think in this room, it's something that's probably not something I need to labor around too much, but listening deeply, I like to think of it like reading between the lines, listening for what could emerge or wants to emerge, or listening for what people are trying to say, but aren't saying specifically with their words. So what else is being communicated? So listening deeply, making connections between perspectives, and then sharing inquiry to sort of enhance and raise up those issues, and specifically around these 6 items. Purpose, like why are we a team? What are we trying to achieve together? What roles does each person play in that outcome? Uncertainty. What is known and unknown? What are we curious about to pick up on as like early indicators of change? Interdependence. Who needs to share knowledge or information with who? This is like basic stuff that people make a ton of assumptions around. How are people going to complete and exchanges and adapt as needed? Like that's interdependence. The role of the leader, we started calling this roles at one point, and we stopped and went back to calling this the role of the leader. And the reason why is because the role of the leader is the one that's least discussed. People make assumptions and project things about the leader, and leaders make assumptions and projections about themselves. So creating clarity is good. Failure, so understanding what a leader can offer and will offer, those kinds of things. Failure, it's going to happen. How are we going to handle it when it happens? What does it look like? What do we actually consider a failure, right? So to me, on my team, a failure is if we miss an opportunity to learn. That's it. That's really the only failure that I consider to exist on our team. So everything else is up for grabs. What's at stake is simple. What are the consequences if we don't achieve our goal? So clarifying these 6 elements, these 6 buckets, listening, making connections, and asking questions that help create clarity around these 6 buckets, help reduce the potential for people to be able to weaponize psychological safety. They also help to reduce the impact if and when it's happening, and redirect when it does happen. So these are very powerful areas to focus our attention, because all 6 help us organize our behavior to work better together, which is really what we're doing when we're assessing psychological safety. So this is why this is sort of the fundamental thing. I just realized I don't have my chat open, so I'm not seeing anything that's in there. Yeah, no one archetype holds the most toxicity. Absolutely. I would definitely agree with you, Kathleen, there. Logitech, I had an interesting conversation with the leadership team at Logitech about flat organizations basically being a metaphor for, shit show. Pardon my swearing, but that is what the discussion was. Hierarchical can be very empowering. Flat organizations can be very empowering. It's all about the agreements and the behavior.
More so, Neil, can I just clarify? More so what I was talking about was this was going back to the conversation about which industry, education or higher education or nonprofits. And I think this is a really dangerous conversation to imply that one is more toxic than another. I think it goes way beyond the institutions themselves.
So I totally agree with that. And for my part in what I shared, it's completely anecdotal. You can't like go down that road and say that that's absolutely true, because you're right. One isn't necessarily more or less than the other, but the question always remains, where can bad behavior be allowed more often? So, and then what that is ultimately is, where does the, elements like these 6 elements, where does it work? So the last one that we're going to do is an exercise. I'm going to speak very briefly about acknowledgement and appreciation. Appreciating when people speak up, appreciating behaviors that are worthwhile repeating. The ratio is 5 to 1. So people need to hear that they did a good thing 5 times compared to 1 time of negative feedback. And it's a really powerful tool. So I like to share this tool with people because it's a strategic tool for wise leaders. If you want to find out what people are struggling with, ask them what they want to be acknowledged for, and they'll tell you. And then you can help. And what we see in high psychologically safe environments is that leaders focus on needs before they focus on tasks. So acknowledging what people are going through and what's happening works really well. So we're going to practice it. So the instructions are to go into the breakout room. You'll have 2 minutes. We're going to do this a couple of times. Participant 1, what would you like to be acknowledged for? And then participant 2 will respond with, I would like to be acknowledged for, and then say whatever it is. And then person 1 is going to repeat as close to word what it was that the person 1 wanted to be acknowledged for, or sorry, person 2 wanted to be acknowledged for. And then, if you know the person or want to add something, please do so. And then you'll swap roles. It'll take 2 minutes, and then we'll come back and switch groups and do it again. Bye, Abby. Thanks for joining us. Okay.
Okay, just double check here. And here you go. 2 minutes.
Welcome back. This is my favorite. I love rounds of acknowledgement. Do we want to do one more for now, or do we want to just call it that? It's 10:29.
Yeah, check with them if they can do one more.
Okay. Okay, I'm curious, just show of hands, does anyone want to do that again? Because it is 10:29. I don't want to go over time unless people are okay with it. No? Okay. All good. I'm curious what that was like for you.
Yeah, I'll put in the chat the question just for you to write in the chat, and if you can, we can also
Thank you very much for joining. Appreciate you being here.
check after. So what was valuable for you? You can actually press return. Let's do it quicker. Let's just write in the chat first.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Murray.
Thanks, Murray. Good to see you. Yeah, I'm curious what else people pop in the chat. But for that, we're at time, so I'd love to see what people pop in the chat. But if you have to go, it was wonderful to see you and chat today, and hopefully got something of value out of it. And look forward to the next time. Fernando, over to you.
Yeah, thank you again for coming and sharing, and lots of things coming in the chat. Yeah, I try to get this presenter full of knowledge. Just bring one little thing to get people some value, and I think we did it. Very nice.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed the session.
Thanks for coming, Frida.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thank you.
Laura, me.